Okay, we're going to move on into Chapter 2 now. Chapter 2 is broken down into two different sets of PowerPoints, the basic chemistry and biochemistry. Today, we're going to talk about basic chemistry. This slide is your objectives. This is what I feel is important out of this chapter. One of the problems students have when they read through a chapter or a PowerPoint, they don't know what I think was important or what the instructor thought was important. This will clear up any confusion for you. If you can go back and you understand and can answer all these objectives, then you have a good understanding of this material and should feel free to move on from there. Now, bear in mind, they may not be worded identically. That's part of knowing that you have an understanding of what the chapter entails. So let's jump right in. Okay, matter. Matter is anything taking up space. Mass equals matter. Now, an atom is the smallest structural unit. Now, matter can be in three different forms, which we all knew. We just probably didn't realize it was called matter. You can have solids, liquids, and gases. Now, next we're going to talk about energy and then get into the rest of these. So here we are at energy. This is the capacity to do work. Energy does not have mass. Instead, it's measured by its effect on matter. Now, there are several forms of energy. For example, chemical energy. We see that in the body in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which we will talk a lot about. The second is electrical energy. These are charged particles. You also see this in the body, and we'll get more into that when we start talking about the cell. Third is mechanical. That's moving matter. You have mechanical energy every time you pick up your leg and start to walk. And then fourth is radiant. Now this moves in waves, and we talk a little bit about it later as well. All right, energy conversion. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It simply changes form. For example, we use gasoline in your car. That's a chemical, so it's chemical energy. But when you crank your car and that gasoline starts moving, eventually it's going to move your car, which then turns it into mechanical energy. And of course, you also give off heat whenever doing work. Atoms. All right. Atoms are the smallest particle of an element that still retains the properties of that element. So there are parts or components here. So, and you can see on the picture to the right, in the center, you have a nucleus. Inside that nucleus are protons, which have a positive charge, and neutrons, which have a neutral charge, which basically means no charge. Now, orbiting around the nucleus are the electrons, and they have a negative charge. Now, atoms are considered neutral because the number of electrons should equal the number of protons, meaning that your negatives will equal your positives, thus making you neutral. Atoms, elements, and compounds. Oh my. All right, here's some properties of elements. Elements cannot be broken down by ordinary means, and they're made of atoms. Now, there are four major elements in your body, and in fact, they make up 96% of your body. That's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and you will be dealing with these continuously throughout the course. This is a most recent version of our periodic table of elements. This is every element that we know of, and it does change because we find new elements. We're going to be using carbon as an example. You can see that in the upper right-hand column on the number 6. Okay, so you can see that. Next to it's nitrogen and oxygen, and then you keep going. So let's hit the next slide. How do atoms make up different elements? Well, you have the basic element characteristics. You have the atomic number, the atomic mass, and then the atomic weight. Elements differ in their number of protons, neutrons, and electrons. We'll see that here in just a second. Okay, let's look at that carbon again. We have carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. We're going to be dealing with carbon as our primary. So above carbon, you see the number 6. That is its atomic number. That is the number of protons. Now remember, we learned earlier that protons equals electrons. So if we have 6 protons, we can then also say we have 6 electrons. Same thing. Let's move over to oxygen. Oxygen has 8 protons. which then again would mean it has 8 electrons. An isotope. This is an alternate form of an element. It has the same number of protons, but a different number of neutrons. So you get a change in weight. Now, radioisotopes are unstable forms of an element, and we use these in biological research and medicine. Now, an example of an isotope, a more familiar one, would also be like carbon-14. We use that in carbon-14 dating, which is how we go back and we age fossils. Okay, again, everybody's kind of familiar with the term carbon-14, but what does that mean? That's the 14th form or isotope of carbon. Okay, all right, let's move on. A molecule is 2 or more atoms held together by chemical bonds. A molecule of an element is 2 or more atoms of the same element. A molecule of a compound is 2 or more atoms of different elements. Okay, so an example of a molecule of an element would be O2. That's oxygen. A molecule of a compound would be CO2, carbon dioxide. Carbon-12 and carbon-14 are called blank and differ in the amount of blank they have. All right, so this is a little question for you, so you can stop for a second, go back in the PowerPoint or your book, and see if you can come up with the answer. Okay, so now I'm going to give you the answer. Carbon-12 and 14 are called isotopes and differ in the number of neutrons they have. So the correct answer would be C. Now, what holds atoms together? Why does it even happen? Chemical bonds. This is the energy between electrons of atoms. Electrons orbit around the nucleus in layers called electron shells. Now, there's something called the octet rule. And what it says that is except for the first shell, which is stable with 2 electrons, atoms are most stable with 8 electrons in the outermost shell. Let's move on to the next slide and give you an example. Okay, so let's look at the top picture on the left-hand side. This is helium. Helium has 2 electrons in its only shell. That's considered full. Now let's move on to our next picture. Notice here we have Ne. Go back and look that up and see if you can find the name on it. Give you a little something to do. All right, first ring has 2 electrons. Then it moves to the outer ring, which has 8 electrons. That means that it's full. Okay? Now, what does that mean by full? That means that it is stable or happy. It's not going to want to bind with another atom. It has enough electrons, so it's good. Now let's look at the bottom picture. We have hydrogen. Hydrogen has 1 electron in its shell. That means that it's not stable. It does not have enough electrons. Remember, the first shell should have at least 2 electrons to be full. This one only has 1. So that means that hydrogen is unstable and it will look to bind with other elements or atoms. Now, let's look at carbon right next to it. It has 2 electrons in its first shell, so its first shell is full. So then we move on to the next shell, and this one only has 4 electrons. So, is it full? No. How many do we need in that outer shell? 8. So we need 8 electrons. We only have 4, so we need 4 more electrons. So carbon will easily bind with others as well. Now there are 3 types of chemical bonds. There's ionic, covalent, and hydrogen. Covalent is the strongest of the 3. Ionic, it dissociates or breaks apart when put into solution. And hydrogen is our weakest of the bonds. And this is what we use to hold our DNA together. Let's start with ionic bonding. Here, electrons are transferred from one atom to another. So you are donating or giving up an electron, or you're receiving it. Now, an ion is a charged particle. So the number of electrons does not equal the number of protons. Now, we have an anion, which is negative, and a cation, which is positive. Now, one of the ways to help you remember is cation has a T in it, and plus looks like a T, so it helps you remember. Let's give you examples here. Okay, here's an example of ionic bonding. If you look to the left of the picture, this is sodium and chloride. Now, sodium by itself has 1 electron in its outermost shell. Okay, that remember means that it's not full because it wants 8 and it only has 1. That means it needs 7 more. That's a lot. Okay, let's look at chloride. Chloride has 7 and it only needs 1. So it is very happy to do a hookup with sodium. So sodium will transfer or donate its outer 1 electron to chloride, thus binding them, which you can see on the right-hand side of the picture. Now, we have to decide which of those is the cation and which is the anion. All right, so let's look at sodium first. What did sodium do in this reaction? It gave up an electron, so it gave up some negativity. That makes it more positive. Thus, it is the cation. Let's look at chloride's role. Chloride accepted an electron, which means it accepted more negativity, making it negative and the anion in this reaction. Now, all your acids, your bases, and your salts are considered electrolytes and all use ionic bonding. Now, this will be really important when we get towards the end of this the end of this course, where we start talking about imbalances and why electrolytes are so important and why is it, a big problem when you're dehydrated. You'll get to learn that these electrolytes will cause major electrical charges across each and every cell, and you get all kind of good moving back and forth of electrons for every nerve impulse and muscle contraction. So all of this is leading somewhere really super cool. Now, one of the most major important things that we have to understand about ionic bonding is that they dissociate in solution, which means they break apart. Okay, for example, sodium chloride is salt. If we put salt in a glass of water, it doesn't remain salt, it breaks apart into the individual ions, into sodium and into chloride back again. That's important for later. Alright, covalent bonding. This is the strongest of the chemical bonds. Here, electrons are shared between atoms. Not donated, not transferred, but actually shared. So there's 2 types of covalent bonds. There's nonpolar bond, where the electrons are shared equally, and polar bonds, where the electrons are shared unequally. This causes different charges across the molecule. Now, this is going to be a really super big deal when we start talking about cells and cell membranes. And you're going to learn here in just a little bit that cell membranes are made of phospholipids, and they have polar heads and non-polar tails. So that's when we'll bring you back into this covalent bonding and understand that if a polar head, that means that that cell is going to carry a charge because those electrons were not shared equally. Let's give you a little picture. Alright, on this top picture you see you have non-polar covalent bonding. So notice there is an equal sharing, where at the bottom picture is a polar covalent bond. There is an unequal sharing. So now this molecule will have a charge. Hydrogen bonding. This is our last of the chemical bonds and our weakest of the chemical bonds. Here, this is dealing with weak chemical attractions between polar molecules. It's very important for the 3D shape of molecules, and this is what we hold our DNA together with. Now, chemical reactions. When do these occur? Well, they occur whenever a chemical bond is either formed, rearranged, or broken. The rate of reactions is dependent on several things. First, temperature. The higher the temperature, the faster the reaction. Second, Particle size. The smaller the particle, the faster it moves. Concentration. The higher the concentration, the faster the reaction will work. Catalysts and enzymes. Their presence increases the rate. You'll learn here in a little bit that enzymes increase the rate of reactions by reducing the activation energy. Mixtures. This is the combining of two or more components by a physical means, not chemical, physical, like stirring. So you're not changing the chemical makeup at all. Next, we're going to move on to types of mixtures. You have solutions, colloids, and suspensions. Solutions are homogeneous, which means homo means same, so here you're mixing a solid with a solid or a liquid with a liquid, and they're typically transparent. In solutions, you have a solute and a solvent. A solute is what is being dissolved. The solvent is what is doing the dissolving. So you could have an example of making Kool-Aid, where you have the packet of Kool-Aid is going to be the solute, and you're going to put that in the solvent, which is water. You mix the two together. In your body, an example would be your bodily fluids like lymphatic fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, synovial fluid, or even your plasma. Let's move on to a colloid. A colloid is a heterogeneous solution, which means you're mixing two different things like solids with liquids. Here you get a milky type fluid. Now, our best example here is cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is what's inside your cells. Now, colloids are typically give you this mixy, solid gel type thing, a lot like what we know as Jell-O. So when you start talking about the cell and you talk about cytoplasm, we talk about it like it's a liquid, but it's really more of like a Jell-O consistency. A suspension is also heterogeneous. Here you're mixing large particles. Okay, so in this instance, blood would be a good example. So in a suspension, like blood, the particles will actually settle out. Now think about that. If you've ever paid attention when they draw your blood, and maybe if you went to a lab, they sat there and put it in a centrifuge. Centrifuges spin suspensions, and by doing so they separate out those layers again. We can't do that with a solution, but we can with a suspension. Alright, in this picture you can see on the left we're giving you an example of a solution where, again, you're taking solute with other particles and a solvent and you're mixing them together. Now, a colloid, remember we said that one was like Jell-O, and then to the right you can see a suspension, which is our blood. Alright, so just a little overview here. This goes back and again just kind of hits the big ones. Remember, atoms make up elements and elements make up compounds. Atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The atomic number equals the proton number. And atoms form chemical bonds to fill their outermost energy shell using that octet rule. Ionic bonds will transfer while covalent bonds share electrons. Your polar bonds have slightly different charges across the molecule because they have the unequal sharing of electrons. Chemical reactions are the altering of bonds, and the rate is influenced by several factors. Alright, here's just a couple little questions for you. If there is an increase in temperature, you would expect a chemical reaction to A, stop, B, go faster, C, slow down, or D, temperature has no effect on chemical reactions. Alright, what do you think it is? Okay, hopefully you had enough time. The answer is B, go faster. Okay, next question. Which of the following is the strongest chemical bond? This is easy. Is it A, ionic, B, covalent, C, hydrogen, D? They are all equally strong. The answer is B, covalent.